You are now listening to
Chakras and Shotguns.
Welcome to Chakras and Shotguns, the podcast that guides you on a journey of spiritual development and personal preparedness. I'm Mik, a marketer, energy healer, and prepper.
And I'm Jen, a former lawyer, yogi, and human design lover. This is episode 59, and on today's episode, we're talking about coming out of the spiritual closet. You've embarked on a spiritual journey and have gotten into all kinds of stuff like astrology and tarot and manifestation, and hopefully this podcast, Chakras and Shotguns. And maybe you want to share these tools and modalities and lessons with friends and family, but you don't know how they'd react, especially if they subscribe to a traditional, more conservative religion. Or maybe you've decided to be private about it all, but you feel somewhat isolated from those that you love.
This is definitely something that Jen and I can relate to. Today, we're going to get into where those fears come from and some tools for showing up as your full, spiritually authentic self. But before we get into that, we want to remind you guys to go to chakrasandshotguns.com and sign up for our mailing list. Each newsletter has great tips and tools that can help you on your spiritual journey and your journey of preparedness.
Yeah, we try and time them with what's going on in the year and make them really timely and fun and short and quick and easy reads that hopefully you can integrate into your daily life. So definitely check that out. All right, let's set the tone for this time with some breath work. And we're going to do things a little bit different today. We're going to put together a little mini yoga flow. So if you're able, we're going to stand up for this one. Don't worry, you're not going to get musty. This is going to be very quick. So standing with your feet hips width distance apart, stand up straight. Bring your hands to prayer as if you're praying. Put them at your heart center, so the middle of your chest. Let's roll our shoulders up to our ears and then down our back. And we're going to take 3 deep breaths here together. Inhaling in through your nose. Filling your belly. You can close your eyes if you would like. And exhaling that breath back out through your mouth. Let's do that again. Inhaling in through your nose. Holding the breath at the top. And exhaling that breath back out through your mouth. Let's do one more together. Inhaling in through your nose. Relaxing your jaw as your tongue stuck to the roof of your mouth. And let's exhale that breath back out through your nose. Now I want you to inhale deeply. Raising your arms over your head. And as you exhale, I want you to bend at the waist as if you're going to touch your toes. Reach as far as you can, bending as much as you need to in your knees to protect your lower back. And maybe you just sway. This is called ragdoll pose. If you're touching your toes, or you can grab opposite elbows and just sway from side to side. Now on your next inhale, roll back up one vertebrae at a time slowly until you're back standing. Have your arms out to your sides. If your arches feel like they have fallen, roll to the outer edges of your feet, not all the way, but just so you're standing up a little bit straighter. And you'll feel, as you stand up a little bit straighter, you'll feel that through your knees, through your hips, and you'll feel yourself, your posture improve. And we're just going to stand here for a moment. This is called mountain pose. And feel the power in this pose. Like, feel how strong your feet feel, how strong your joints feel. And now, the end of this yoga flow, we're going to move into what is called star pose. So, bringing your feet out a little bit further. And then raising your arms up almost as if you're about to start the YMCA. It's a throwback. And as you're in this pose, feel like it's a declaration that you're here, you're a star, that you're shining, that you're bright, that you're seen. Maybe you smile a little bit. Feel the confidence of this pose. All right. I hope that was helpful. I promised it wasn't going to be a crazy workout over a podcast. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Jen. Jen is actually in the process of embarking on a journey to become a yoga instructor. So I see you bringing that to the pod, trying something different with the breath work. I see where you're going with that.
Just a little bit.
Dope. So let's jump into our main topic. What are some common fears that you might have about sharing your spiritual awakening and spiritual journey with friends and family? You might have a fear about being ridiculed. Are they going to think I'm weird? Are they going to laugh at me? Are you going to get interrogated? This journey is really new for you, and are they going to ask you a bunch of questions that maybe you're not really ready to answer? What about rejection and condemnation? Are they going to tell you that you're wrong, that you're going to hell, that you're evil, that this all comes from the devil, that stuff you're doing? What about loss? Are they going to disconnect from you, abandon the relationship that you built? These are all really valid concerns.
Yeah, I think it's even more valid because what we're talking about is it's not sharing a new hobby. Like, hey, I got really into macrame, and some in your friends like, that's really corny. Like, why are you into like building Lego scenes? Like the experience of spirituality in and of itself it's deeply personal and it's very sacred. It doesn't matter if it's in a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a temple, in your home. Sharing that with others makes this a very vulnerable and intimate situation, especially if you think that your beliefs aren't the same. It can be very intimate and very scary even when your beliefs are the same. Mm-hmm. Like, I have always felt nervous and a little bit exposed, even when like going to Bible studies used to just kind of give me anxiety, honestly. Like, I don't know what this passage means, or that's kind of private, and like, why do we have to share this in a circle? And these are all people that we were all of the same faith, or like praying in front of people can be very nerve-wracking for some. So that's when we're all in the same boat. Now, if I'm rolling up talking about some other stuff, how much anxiety do you feel around that? There are still things that only Mik and some very close spiritual advisors are aware of that I've experienced in my spiritual journey. And these are things that I haven't even shared on the podcast. So if anybody feel you, I feel you. So Mik, what has your experience been sharing your journey and your newfound spiritual gifts?
Yeah, this has been a wild ride. First off, I thought people were going to think I was nuts. Like, what the hell has this dude been smoking? He talking about all this weird stuff he's seeing. What is going on? So I had this like narrative that was like built up in my head. There was this like little voice that I felt like I was kind of feeding, where it was just like, they're going to think you're weird. Don't tell anybody. Just tell your wife. And just keep it in your little bubble.
And thankfully, I don't think you're weird.
I know, right? I at least had that outlet, because I'm sure there are some people who feel like they can't even tell their partner, right? So yeah, that was a lot. And I just, I don't know. I just felt like there was so much of my identity that was quote unquote normal. And like there was this image of myself that I have, and these new experiences didn't fit that image.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, how can I reconcile this and how can I present myself in this new way and still get that acceptance that I wanted from my friends and family? So it was hard. I will say one thing though, that a big spark for our spiritual journey was a trip that we took to Ghana. We talked about that back in episode 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so while we were in Ghana, we're interacting with some of these very historical places where we're seeing how, you know, enslaved people and their relationship with Christianity was. And it kind of just like shook our foundation of our belief system. And luckily on that trip, there were about a dozen or so of our friends that were also there. And so I think we were on the extreme end of the spectrum in terms of like how it changed our belief system.
Yeah.
But there were certainly other people who were feeling some of the same things to maybe a lesser degree.
Right.
And so I think it was easier to talk to them
Mm-hmm.
about where we were going because they had at least like moved a little bit away from that kind of like traditional conservative religion that we were all brought up in.
Yeah.
So that helped. And so, you know, I think if you can extrapolate that to other people, it's like, well, is there a way in which you can help other people experience the spark that may have led to your journey? How can you bring them in closer to that so they can at least start to relate a little bit more to where you're moving? So that could be something that people could take away from that experience. I also want to talk a little bit about my journey in shamanism. I talked a little bit about it. It's like the first time I mentioned it was in the last episode. And what's particularly interesting about that is my parents, growing up, we were going to church all the time, every Sunday. But I remember a distinct point in time when my dad was really questioning his involvement with the church and his belief system. And he stopped coming to church with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my mom, she was steadfast. She kept taking us as kids. So it was like us and her going to church continually. And it lasted for a few months where this happened. And so kind of thinking about my parents, I thought, well, of the two of them, my dad's probably going to understand this more so than my mom. And so I was like, my mom is probably going to be a little more hesitant to understand some of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was interesting is in the very beginning of my journey in shamanism, my mom came to stay with us because our youngest daughter was around 3 months old and she wanted to kind of help out and spend some time with the kids. And this was around the time a lot of weird stuff started happening.
Yeah.
Like unexplainable things that like I still haven't really talked about on the podcast started happening. And my mom was there to witness these things. And so she was like, okay, I can't even deny this stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that helped her to be more accepting of it, you know? And so that's been an interesting way in which I've been able to kind of connect. And she's like, she listens to the podcast, right? Like she's kind of embraced things and really rolled with everything that's been going on. So that's been an interesting ride there. But I'll say that, you know, once I kind of started to open up more to my friends, I did get a lot of clients actually. So folks who come over for Reiki sessions and shamanic healing have been folks in my network and have been friends. So it's been a wild ride. I had the narrative and I kind of broke it down and opened myself up to folks, and they were actually pretty accepting. So,
yeah. That's cool. I think for me, one of my blocks has been, if this was somebody that I knew, I'd be like, girl, do you see what she doing? She was a whole lawyer, and now she reading tarot cards. Like, she is having a midlife crisis. I'm not midlife, but she's having some type of crisis. She's having a psychotic break. I don't know. So I like only imagine what people think, and that's part of the work that I have to do about like not worrying about what people think and how they perceive me, because that's none of my business.
Sure.
But I think that there were a lot of things going on for me personally when my spiritual journey kicked off. I think the year prior Work had been really, really crazy. I was a new mom in 2019. Like we had our daughter in the back half of 2018. So I was a newish mom. I had a huge falling out with a very close friend of mine. I started therapy with my therapist that I still have today, who has been monumental. Like a lot of things were going on. And I think the spiritual journey, yes, is a big, huge part of that. But I think I was in the middle of changing and evolving and recognizing patterns that didn't serve me, recognizing toxic energies that I was letting into my life, recognizing where I wasn't having boundaries. And I think all of this kind of rolled up into one. It's also kind of like, it's not crazy, but it's kind of crazy how the timing of all of it worked. Like I had a full like kind of breakdown of like friendship and identity, and like I was taking on this new identity as a mom. And then I go into like, but I could have still had my same old spirituality, right? Like that could have been steadfast and like a constant. And then like that kind of broke down and like I had to kind of rebuild that. So I think for people who knew me well before that, I'm like, I don't know if they're going to understand who I am now and what that looks like. I don't know if they listen to the podcast. I don't know if I want to share certain things with them. My mother being one of them who doesn't listen to the podcast because she's terrified and she's still very traditional conservative Christian. And so there are a lot of things that I don't tell her about. She has no idea that I read tarot. I think it would freak her out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's kind of been my experience. One example in particular, all of my fears around that kept me from sharing a lot of this journey with a very dear friend of mine. And it kind of came to a head in the last week. We had a conversation. It's very hard for us to connect. We both have 2 kids. We're in different time zones now, trying to find that time. And she told me that she was very hurt. Like it was very hard for her to listen to the podcast because she felt like she was finding out about this new person, this evolved person late. Like she was behind. Like she was like, I don't even know who you are anymore. And not in a negative way, but like I miss you. And I felt left out that I didn't get to share and learn about your experience in real time. And I think it made me realize that all of my fears around sharing those things with her, because I know that some of those things she may not understand or she may not believe in, actually made me, I thought I was protecting the relationship, but it actually made me lose a little bit of that connection. And so we're actively working our way back to those vulnerable and safe spaces.
Yeah, Jen, that's deep. I hadn't even really thought about that, right? That there could potentially be things that are revealed on this show that like people who don't even know us know about us, that our friends from years and years ago, if they don't listen to the show, they don't know about, right?
Mm-hmm. It kind of blew my mind because I think like I had a lot of fear around sharing those things, right? And I do this with other things, not just spirituality, but it's like a fear of being like seen and exposed.
Yeah.
And so I will tend to withdraw and under the guise of like I'm protecting myself, but you're actually potentially hurting others to the extent that you want deep, intimate connections.
Yeah. I think we all do it to some degree, right?
Yeah.
It's like a human need to have someone that you feel really close to.
Yeah. I think it's that dance of boundaries and like walls.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is impenetrable. Like you're not going to know my feelings and my emotions and my hurt and my pain around any subject. But like, yeah, you can't get hurt, but nobody can connect with you either.
Mm-hmm. So let's say you want to go in and have some deep connections with folks that you've had relationships in the past. What are some ways that you can share your spiritual journey with these folks? One is you can just wait to be asked. You don't have to go shouting from the rooftops that you've experienced something profound if you don't want to. If it naturally comes up, go ahead and offer it.
Yeah, you don't want to jump in and say like, hey, I saw an alien last night. It's from a past life of mine. And he's always with me. Like, somebody be like, I just wanted to know if you wanted cheese or pepperoni. That's it. Like, you're being weird.
No, I saw it compared, like the spiritual journey. I saw it kind of compared to like the college freshman who comes home after that first semester of school and they're like sharing what they learned in Psych 1. And they're like so excited about it. It's like no one has ever heard these concepts before. And so it can be kind of like annoying to like have this person like throwing kind of knowledge vomit at you. And so try not to be that person. I think waiting to be asked about it is appropriate in that sense. Next, be ready for questions. People are naturally curious and they may want to genuinely know your perspective on these things. Figure out what you're willing to share and what you want to keep private so you have that kind of ready.
Yeah, I am a person that doesn't like questions. I don't like to be questioned. I don't know why. It's part of my human design.
Yeah, it's a manifestor thing I was going to say.
If I slow down and I like really hone in on what it is, it's a specific energy of questions that I don't really care for. So everything is not an interrogation, but some people will interrogate you. And they'll be like, so why? Why are you into this? And what is this about? Da, da, da. And I'm not going to share myself in that space with you because I don't feel like the energy's right.
Yeah, you don't want to have to defend yourself. You're fine.
Exactly.
You're fine like informing others, but you don't want to defend your position.
Exactly. Because why am I defending it to you?
Yeah.
I said at the top of this episode, this is personal and sacred, baby. Like, take it or leave it. I think I have to acknowledge that I can get triggered when people start asking me questions, and then I have to like take a breath and say like, okay, hold on, don't shoot them at me all at once. But yes, I will be willing to answer some of them.
Next, remember to have some boundaries. If there is something that you're not comfortable sharing, just say it. Or if one of the other fears actually comes true, like they make fun or they respond negatively, tell them that your spirituality is sacred to you. And if they're not willing to respond with love and without judgment, then you don't want to talk with them about that subject.
And one note on boundaries. I think I might have said this before on the podcast, but boundaries are for you. They're not for the other person. So if the next time you're in a setting and this person says something like, oh, did you know like Jen thinks Archangel Michael like watches out for her? Yes, I set a boundary and this person didn't give a fuck, and that's annoying. But the boundary is for me. And so that's a time for me to say, hey, I told you my spirituality is not a joke. I don't appreciate that. Maybe we should change the subject. That the conversation's now closed. So, and you have to reinforce that, and it's for you. And if you're like me, I struggled with speaking up for myself because I didn't want to rock the boat, or I didn't want to throw a turd in the punch bowl, as they say, and ruin the party or the event or the dinner or whatever. But this is about something that's important to you. So if there's anything worth saying, hey, let's pause. I didn't really appreciate that. Maybe we should change the subject. And then if you need to collect yourself after that, then collect yourself after that. But don't just swallow the ridicule of something that's really important.
Another thing you should try to do is meet people where they are. So maybe you don't think of God as male any longer, or you're not sure that there is only one path to salvation. There are ways to talk about the universe that are on common ground.
Yeah, this is a good one. I think this can come up a couple of ways. So, for instance, my mom can be weirded out by the crystals, or she's seen us take the girls out at our old house and let them touch the tree trunks in our backyard. And she was like, are you a tree hugger now? Do you worship trees? And I was like, no. And that's an opportunity for me to meet her where she is. So I'll say something like, well, God made everything on the earth, right? And she's like, yes. And I was like, including the trees, right? And she's like, yes. And I was like, scientifically, we know everything has energy, right? She said, yes. I said, it's just appreciating God's creation and the energy of the tree. It doesn't mean that I pray to the tree. It's just an appreciation of the tree, which is a way to meet her where she is, but it's also the truth. I didn't lie. I believe that each tree has its own energy and its own life force, and it's a way to ground with the energy of the earth. And so she's like, okay, it's always like a little side eye, like, logically that makes sense, but it's me meeting her where she is. I was in Dallas last week, and my mom and stepdad have like devotion every morning. And so when I started on this spiritual journey and we would interact with my parents and would have devotion, I was like, I don't know what this means, and how am I gonna circle that square, as they say? Like, how am I gonna reconcile what I believe with what they believe and where it differs, and this is very traditional and this is not quite the same. And so this past week, I just let myself sit in like the intention of the moment, which was connection with the divine. I don't call God a he, so I kind of skimmed over that a little bit. I did point out the things that I didn't agree with, but again, I did it in a way that met them where they were. So there was a line in the devotion about how our basically like our path is predetermined and what we're supposed to do is predetermined. And the only way to fall out of that is to be, what was the word? Like to not believe and be almost like willful, like a child in a way of being like, I'm just not going to do what God tells me to do. And if you listen to the time episode, we've talked about like how beings that are not in 3D, that are higher dimensional beings, can perceive time. And so I believe that God, source, energy, spirit can perceive time in that way. And if our timeline is predetermined, there's nothing that I can do to fall off of that timeline. Not even disbelieve for being petulant or acting like a child and saying, I'm not going to do what I was supposed to come to this planet and do. Like my moment of disbelief and my moment of saying like, no, I'm not gonna, that was already in my timeline. And so I said this to my parents in a way that met them where they were. I was like, so if God is all powerful and laid out this timeline like this, then God already knew that I was going to do that at that moment. And they were like, that is a good point. So it's not me trying to witness to them or indoctrinate them. It's just, I am offering my perspective. I think there is like, there can be an urge to be like, okay, well, I don't want to be disrespectful, or I don't want to open myself up to them condemning me or whatever. So I'm just not going to say anything, or I'm just going to nod and just sit here and say like, oh, okay, yes, that was a very nice passage from the upper room. If you know, you know. But I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I'm not going to be like, well, I don't believe in any of this. And that's not quite the truth either. So it's like, where can we find common ground? And I think that can also translate to a lot of different things, to the extent that it can. Politics is hard. But that can, that's what, you don't want to just be around people who are in your bubble either. So it's about like different perspectives, diversity of thought, and getting to like, wow, you know what? I was talking to so-and-so and they really made me think of something in a different way.
Yeah. And then last, I would encourage folks not to overshare. This goes along with boundaries. Everyone doesn't need to know everything about you and your spirituality. And some people aren't going to be able to accept everything that you find yourself into. I think we've both experienced this, right? There's certain things we're willing to kind of put out there, but we definitely hold back on other things, even from the podcast audience, right?
And I think like we could get really excited. Like when we first started getting into human design, or me, I guess, we would be at dinner parties and we'd be like, what do you think they are? We would do that with Enneagram too. We're like, what do you think they are? I think they're this. I think they're that. And I think I didn't want to take over the dinner or whatever and like pulling up people's charts or whatever, even though I really, really wanted to do it. But you just have to be, the excitement is real, and that's a real emotion. And I think this can happen with a lot of things where you're excited about something in the Psych 101 class or whatever, and you just want to tell everybody about it. Yeah. You've seen the lights, but you have to be careful about, maybe read the room, really. Maybe that's not the vibe. Maybe they don't want to be on it right now, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think there was a dinner party recently that we went to where I had just come back from like this super intense plant medicine journey. And I kind of came into the space and I just felt like so weird because I felt like the vibe was completely different from where I had been like the previous like 36 hours.
Yeah.
And so that was like just really hard to reintegrate back into. So I think it's knowing where your mindset is, knowing the space that you're in, and kind of adapting to that environment.
So we say all that to say, you may have heard each of these tips and say, yeah, I'm good. Like my family or my friends are too religious for me. They're too close-minded. I can't share any of these things with them. And so as someone who has experienced that and felt that can feel very lonely, feeling like you've grown or you've evolved and you can't be vulnerable with your day ones, like your nearest and dearest. And I would ask that you consider if your outlook on life is about light and love and positivity and strength and loving yourself, your nearest and dearest are probably going to notice anyway. Very few of us are really that slick to hide our light or even our pain from others. So people may notice that you're not as reactive or negative, or maybe you're more optimistic, and they may ask, like, what are you doing? Like, what have you been on? Like, is it an edible? Like, can I have some? Is it Magic Mind? Like, what is, like, what is going on? So, let that little light shine,
This little light of mine. So while you may have a friend say, wow, like you feel lighter, you could also experience someone who, for whatever reason, was more comfortable with the version of you that wasn't as strong, or who wasn't looking for joy or manifesting success. These people just might be uncomfortable with this new person. People really like consistency and predictability, even if that means kind of putting you in this box. So that may mean that some hard conversations may need to be had, and trying to find a way to get this person that you have a relationship to really accept this new normal of you as a person.
I think I struggled with that too, because you hear it in a lot of different instances, like, oh, that person might be in your life for a reason or a season, and you got to let these people go. Like, you might have outgrown this person. And I always really struggled with that language. Like, I'm not looking to drop people. Like, if I have to, I will. But I don't necessarily want to. I think my advice would be, depending on the person, to just be as honest and vulnerable as possible. I think I've looked back on certain situations where I have lost friendship, and in each of those, it was probably an instance of one of us or both of us not being as honest and vulnerable as possible. And those conversations are hard. They are not fun. I would rather do anything else. But at least you would better have an understanding. I think it's, I think the world needs a little bit more vulnerability. Like, we spend so much time, men and women, trying to be hard. Like, I'm not going to cry at work. I'm not going to let you see my feelings. I'm not going to let you know how I really feel about this thing that that then we find that we cannot articulate our emotions. We have no language for it. We can't even feel our emotions. We stuff it down, and then it pops out inevitably. And now you crying on the bedroom floor. Like, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And so sharing is caring. No. But I'm finding that the more that I go private, I'm just delaying the inevitable with certain people. So, that conversation with my really good friend that we just had this past week, that conversation was like 4 years in the making. It was like 3.5 years. And COVID was to blame, and distance and all of these things, and having kids and whatever. But that was a conversation that needed to be had, and it was going to be had. And it kind of, I'll share it if it happens, but I think I need to have a conversation with my mom that, like, how I'm going to go about my spirituality is going to look a lot different from hers. And if you know anything about the Enneagram, she's a 1. So it's going to be very black and white to her. And so I'm dreading it, but she's recognized that I'm a different person. She says it, like, you're different. She knows it. And so I probably need to get around to doing that. But I think once I shared everything that I wanted to share with that friend, one, she was aware of it. She was like, yeah, I could tell that you were doing this, like, hold back, share kind of pattern. And I think she felt like she didn't get the opportunity to be a safe space for me. Like, I deemed her not to be safe. I was like, she's not safe. It's not safe for me to share here. And because I was so afraid of being hurt. And I think she wanted the opportunity to show up for me to be a safe space. And I have to give her that opportunity. You could get hurt, but you could also experience something very beautiful.
All right. Well, hopefully you guys got something out of that and can think through how you may want to broach your new spirituality with those that are close to you if you haven't already. Before we go, though, we do want to remind you about that mailing list. Go to chakrasandshotguns.com and sign up for it. We send out the newsletter every couple of weeks filled with tons of tips and tools that you can use going forward. Finally, if you're loving the show, please subscribe and give us 5 stars wherever you listen.
Namaste.